And hi everyone, and welcome to this first episode of Odoo Unplugged. I am Olivier Colson. I will be the host today. I'm a developer at Odoo. I'm part of R&D. I work in accounting team, and my specialty is really the reports. But I'm not alone today because we have a very interesting subject to discuss actually. So we're going to talk about creativity in the world of the industry. And with me are among the finest members of our R&D. Don't laugh at that. Self-proclaimed failure, of course. Otherwise, it's not fun. So maybe it's time to introduce you guys. I suggest you give a few words about yourself. So who are you? What's your name? How long have you been there? And what is your pet baby, project. Your pet project in Odoo? So Samuel, you go first.
Yeah. So I'm Sam. I've been working at Odoo since 2019. And I've been a part of the JavaScript framework team since 2021. And as part of my work on that team, I've been working on OWL, and more specifically, I was one of the main driving forces behind the new reactivity system in OWL 2.
It's the reactivity system, not the creativity system.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't really just write the creativity system, but hopefully we'll...
Maybe someday.
We'll get the creativity system today.
Maybe someday.
If you're creative enough, you never know. Talking about OWL, Jerry, hi.
Yes, hello. I'm Jerry de Bonny. I've been working on the web framework team for 10 years now. And I'm very happy to have convinced Anthony to start working on a new framework after 5 years. That what became OWL. So yeah, you could say that OWL is kind of my baby project.
Mm-hmm. And today, all of Odoo uses it.
Yeah, OWL is the base JavaScript framework, base UI system that we use to do for the front-end code.
Mm-hmm. And last but not least, Nicolas.
Yeah, so my name is Nicolas Baillet. I'm working at Odoo for about 5 years, and I'm really interested into innovative systems. I'm always comparing different kind of technologies, frameworks, and try to come up with new ideas to make it to make the tech stack even better. So yeah, that's about it.
And you have your own framework as well.
Yes, I have a visual framework to make it fast to create interfaces.
Okay, so let's get started on the subject now. Creativity. What are we going to talk about exactly? How would you define that first? I think it's really important because, well, people have to have an idea what we're talking about, right? So how would you define that in the professional world? What is that? Because it is something important for a developer, right?
Yeah, I think creativity is about solving problems in interesting and innovative ways.
In useful ways.
Yeah, I guess. There's obviously there's the traditional sense of creativity with artists and painters and stuff. And people might be tempted to not think of software developers as a very creative role, but I tend to disagree quite a lot, actually. I think writing software is one of the most creative things that I've done in my entire life.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very true. A lot of people, actually, for non-developers, it's not obvious that you need to be creative for that job, because a lot of people just see the job as being in front of a computer and doing crazy math stuff, which is not at all what we're doing, right?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge when I try to explain my job to my friends and family.
Mm-hmm. I gave up a long time ago.
Yeah, I kind of gave up. I try to stay quite vague. I usually have to, but they always think of me as working on my computer and just writing code, but without like a machine, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's not really the reality of the day-to-day job.
And how would you describe the reality of the day-to-day job?
It's a challenge, as I told you.
Yeah, but we have an audience of experts here. Come on, it's all right.
It's hard to describe. It's a mix of talking to people, of understanding problems, of reading code, and sometimes writing code. But even then, it's sometimes you are writing. You're trying to solve a problem, and I think that's what the topic of this session is about. But sometimes you have to, how to solve the problem. You have to do it yourself as well. So there is no one way to describe our day-to-day life.
And it's always different. Every time when we come to work, we have different kind of problems to solve, and we also have to tap into different kind of creativity. Creativity to be useful, and sometimes creativity to kind of explore things. We don't know yet if it's gonna have some usefulness in the future, but we explore, and then Sometimes we just need to make the job work, but we also need to be creative in the process of development. So yeah, creativity is very broad.
Of course, there is the R in research and development, in R&D, and well, you need to do some research sometimes. So to try something that is hopefully interesting, but you don't know, and you need to try, and you will need to adapt it while doing it, and maybe at some point it will be groundbreaking, but you don't know when you start. You might have an idea, but you don't know it. I have a pretty funny way to explain what development is to non-developers that I like, actually, because it's a bit it's a bit of poetry like that. It's essentially development and just programming in general. I like to say that it's like the magic that mankind invented, because come on, you have a bunch of people knowing like formulas and ways of writing weird things that they are the only ones to understand, to produce some effects in the real world. There is one word for that, and it's magic, definitely. And like for any kind of magic, you need to have this kind of guys, with, just imagine a wizard, okay? The Baldur's Gate wizard, the typical Dungeons and Dragons things. Well, this is a creative profile, okay? That's a guy that will be a bit weird, that will talk a lot and so on. So this is definitely the kind of guy that is interesting in programming as well, I think.
So you're saying writing software is like casting a spell or something?
Yeah,
I mean, it is. You're literally writing arcane incantations,
and you don't even need a wand for that.
And symbols. And I think like it's also not just a wizard inside the universe of Dungeons and Dragons, but it's also very much like playing Dungeons and Dragons. Sometimes you have some tools that are in your toolkit, you know what spells you have, and you're trying to find interesting ways to use them. And I think it's also very much the case for software development. You have these concepts that you had to learn, and these seem like very boring concepts. And then depending on the problem that you're trying to solve and how you are chaining these concepts together, you can get a very interesting results. Like with spells in Dungeons and Dragons, sometimes like that's the entire point, right? You're creating an interesting scenario, and in software you're using building blocks to create an interesting solution that solves the problem and gets to your goal.
And that brings us actually to the biggest part, I think, of this conversation. It's the elements, the factors that will drive creativity. And I think we can start with, unless you have something to say.
I wanted to come back to your video game idea. You were talking about Dungeons and Dragons. I think I like about software. Another aspect of that is like building stuff. So it's more, to me, it's maybe more like a building game where you try to make a complex system out of basic ideas, so to combine them together. Yeah, I think there is like a very interesting attraction to build stuff. We like building stuff.
And indeed, so it goes very, very well with what I was going to say, because one big element that will actually build your creativity from a programming perspective, at least, is when you're learning already. So you both talked about the basic building blocks and the concepts that you learn at university, at school, or in books or on the internet, or whatever. You don't need to go to school to learn that. It's, the moment where you learn them and you start being like, I could use that to do something for Dungeons and Dragons. Why not? That's something a lot of people do, actually, or for some other purpose you have in your life, next to studies, next to all that, for some personal projects. And I think that's where things start to get interesting, because that's the moment where you start inventing things. And I think it's really part of the process for, I think, any developer, actually. Maybe
any creative activity. I think there is a drive to make something, and that's what pushes to do something. We like it. And then you start working, and is it something that I think it's something that can disappear, right? Maybe not disappear entirely, but it's something that you have the environment is not the same anymore, and let's say it, you're less free than before. You have to spend time working on something that maybe you don't really that much care about. What would be then the elements that would keep you creative in such a context?
Haha, the question.
Kind of stumped there. I think there's a lot of things that can keep you creative, but mostly just the problems themselves. They keep you creative because you have to solve them, and obviously if you have to solve them, they're not already solved. You have to find something. So there is this iterative process where you're tasked with something, you have a problem to solve, and then you have to try various things. Some things you already know will work or won't work depending on your experience. So that's one of the things in your toolkit. And then the rest you have to just try them. Also talk with the people whose problem you're solving to make sure that what you're doing actually solves their problem. So yeah, I guess there's like the constraints to me are a big driver of creativity, right? If you have the world as your options, then you don't really know where to go, and sometimes just having some sense of direction, it really propels you forward, and it lets you know, it lets you just really let the rubber hit the road, right?
Because indeed, in your first projects, that's something that will happen a lot actually, that you don't have any constraint, and you go in tons of different directions at the same time, and essentially it goes nowhere. And you learn that, I think, after doing that a few times, being like, okay, I need to stay reasonable and just put constraints on myself.
On the other way, if you have too many constraints, then it's the opposite, and you just cannot solve a problem if we are told how to solve the problem. But yeah, well, you can do it, but it's not a creative activity. If you just have to write to develop that feature in that specific way, and you are already constrained so much by the framework and by maybe your manager or something, then it's not really so creative anymore.
So is it not then?
So there's like a balance.
And I think there is also the we have to choose wisely the set of constraints, because for instance there is a time constraint. When if we have a deadline, then we will focus on maybe the most essential things for reaching that deadline, which will drive us just to do the necessary work to make it reach the deadline. But on the other way, if we don't have a deadline, it lets us explore the ground and allow us to find new ways to develop it. So yeah, it's just about the time constraints. So finding just the right set and exploring different set of constraints can be useful. So it's an art in and of itself to know what should be the constraint here.
I think time constraint is very important as well. You need, I think in many cases you need a constraint. Maybe not a hard line, like before an important release. You need code to work, but still it's very important to have that sense of progression.
And I think what you said was very interesting, because indeed the time constraint, it's good if it's not there all the time actually. So maybe there is a time question on the time constraint, and the fact that sometimes you may be a little more free to just take the time to do something properly, and that sometimes you need indeed to have this timer, this needs to be ready for that moment. If I take the example in Odoo, we have the release every year, which is basically always the deadline. It's really rare that we have something that we spent months working on before the release and that is not released for this release, and that will need to wait for the year after that. It can happen for very complex stuff, but usually it's not the case at all. And I think it's a good thing actually, because it forces you at some point to be like, okay, maybe I should just prioritize and do this first, that second, and maybe leave some room to improve that in future versions. But I think getting a result is also important because it's rewarding. And so if you don't get any reward for creating things, do you still create as much?
But now this is more specific to software development. But
I think it's true for every field.
Yeah, no, but we're talking about release schedule, and this is important to have some quick feedback as well. So when you release some project and people start using it, they will discover a lot of features, a lot of business flaws, a lot of bugs that you would not expect. They would do something in the really very creative way as also, and not necessarily positive. I don't mean that as a positive, but still, you need that feedback to iterate. And I think that's really for software, and maybe for everything else. For software, you need that iterating process.
Yeah, because it adds challenge. sometimes really hard constraints as well, because there is something buggy or something, you have something that is working but you discover that it's only working well in 80% of the cases, and for the 20 other percent, it's not just not working; it's doing something wrong. Then you have to fix it. And sometimes it's not that obvious. It's not always just adding a comma somewhere, or I don't know. It might be just reworking a whole part of the mechanism to make that thing work and fit the need. But I think it's also something that will bring you to new ideas, and maybe in the future it will also make you realize, okay, we modeled that this way, but actually we should have gone for this other option, and let's redo everything to do it like that. So maybe bugs also then are a source of inspiration somewhere.
But that's true. You need to fix in proper way for the proper context. So if in a stable release, you need to find a way to hook your bug fix in the proper way without breaking the system, without any breaking change, because the rest of the software ecosystem may use your system, and if you change something, it will break, of course. So, but of course, this is not the correct way usually. So you need to find a way to do it properly in stable releases, and in master release you can do it in a proper way if you find one.
And it's something we face a lot at Odoo, right? Because we have this very modular architecture, and we have the community using our software and so on. And so even if we ourselves know that we could change this function and totally replace it with something else, because basically it's called in only 2 places and it's very simple, you're never sure that it wasn't used by some partner somewhere to do something that was correct with it, but that relied on the thing you're trying to fix, and that you will not essentially break his software.
Talking about constraint, we talked about the time constraint. Now this is more like a constraint for a system such as Odoo, which is like a platform for applications. So we have like many layers of code that builds on the bottom layers, and they need to be stable in a way.
And does it add something for the code base itself and the size and the complexity also of it? Does it add something also to the creative options you might get? Or is it more like something that is restraining you?
So I think, as I was saying earlier, the set of constraints kind of determines which direction you can go, but it doesn't really change how creative you can be, right? It's just that the set of options that you can explore are different. And so the things that you can do with such a huge code base, with so many people relying on it, are sometimes more limited, but also they have much more impact, right? Because you're changing a little bit of the code that might be a small thorn in somebody's side, but when you have thousands and thousands of other developers relying on your code, then maybe it's really worth the effort doing it. And I think that's one of the main drivers behind OWL, right? When you're working with a small team and a small code base, having the previous system that we had before with the widgets and this very imperative API, it's kind of manageable when you're working on small projects. And then as we're growing, it becomes harder and harder to understand how all of the code is interacting with one another, because we have modules that are patching, modifying widgets in place to make their behavior different with some module installed. And then we also have these widgets that are becoming bigger and bigger, and it's becoming harder and harder to keep all of the state of the widget inside of your head. And so that's one of the main driving forces behind, well, we need something that's more declarative, that lets you just think about the state, and the UI is just handled automatically. And so it's kind of it's one of the main reasons why we even think that it was necessary to rewrite the framework, whereas I'm pretty sure if Odoo was still a 15-person company, then this idea would have never even been allowed to bloom.
Yeah, it has a cost, of course, and it depends on the size of the project. So I would argue in a way that if you have a larger code base, I guess maybe if you work on some subsystem that is well isolated from the rest, you can easily change it, modify it, update it, fix it, understand it. But when you're working on the framework layer that the rest of the application builds upon, you need to be careful. And a larger code size means that it takes a lot of effort, and we need to be careful about changing it. So I think some large software companies use code mods and system to automatically update part of the code base when I need to change, and it's a challenge. So you can be creative, but it's still you feel the weight of the code base upon you.
On the other hand, the fact that you have this whole code base around you and a lot of people making it and just making it grow and evolve, I think it's also an incentive for yourselves. Tell to yourself, okay, they're doing that. We need to do something as well. It's a matter of pride. You're in this atmosphere that brings you to propose new ideas and to make big changes as well. I think it's important as well.
Yeah, another thing that goes with the size of the code base, I think Jerry briefly mentioned it when he was talking about code mods. When the size of the code base is sufficiently big, then now you have a reason to build good tools to work with the large size of the code base. Whereas when you have a small code base, just the need just isn't there, right? So there are new problems that come and that you have to solve, and that's also a creative process. And just realizing that a lot of people are relying on a bad system and that you might need some tooling to deal with it, then now you have a new problem to solve, and you can be creative about it and solve it in an interesting way and make everybody's life easier.
Also, going back on the framework side of things, so when you're making really a framework and you want to change everything, and it will impact everyone and you need to be careful, I think that's also something that non-developers might forget actually about the job, because there is creativity to be expressed in the way you will organize the development. So not in the development itself, but for this kind of thing, you need to find a way to update the code base without breaking everything and without forgetting things and communicate on that as well.
It's really a challenge in itself. So I think I want to comment on that about the transition to OWL. So basically we have, I'm not sure about the size, like more than 100,000 lines of code. We add 100 lines of code, more than that on JavaScript code base, and we had to change that, to update that, to use OWL, our new framework. And it's a big change. It's not really it's even worse than going from a modern framework to another modern framework, where you have like a kind of the same IDs, the same declarative system. Now, moving from the widget system to OWL was moving from an imperative system to a declarative one, and it means rewriting the complete code base. And so, it took us, I think, 3 years to do that. And it was really a big challenge, not only for our team, but for other teams as well. So it was a communication challenge. We had to coordinate with other teams to update some part of the code base. We had to make it, we had no choice but to make it in multiple steps. We cannot have like a big pull request that we maintain for 3 years and then merge it. That's not possible. We have more than 200 developers, or even more than that, working on the code base while we were working on it. And so really we were converting some code, and at the same time you have hundreds of developers adding new code in the old system. So how do you manage that? For this case, we had to imagine a way to write all components into widgets and the other way around. And then we tried to convert some part of it, and then we decided that we had to do the other way around. We converted the web client and then the rest. And we had to find a lot of ways to make it work. So it's really, it creates additional complexity. You had to have in your mind the previous code base, the new code base, and all the intermediary system that all the layers that make them communicate properly. And it's really a really big deal.
Yeah, and creativity in development when you work in a big company is actually not only the creativity in the software that you create, but also the workflow, the workflow that you have, the process and the communication with others. And that's something very specific with companies, and the bigger it is, the bigger the challenges. And I think for beginner developers, we don't realize when we start how much time we spend just to figure out what is the proper workflow, and also how to communicate with the colleague. And it's always changing because we're always new tasks. When we finish one, we have a new challenge, and it's a new kind of things to.
And it can
to think
become really
about.
hard because also my personal example is the rewriting of the reports in Odoo 16, where it was on a smaller scale, but we had this kind of problems as well. And you have you're doing your thing. You have something that works on every case that you checked. Cool, and then you check the cases that you haven't checked yet, and you realize that it will not work. So we had that a lot, and I think a big thing for when you're doing some kind of big technical change like that is also the contact with like your management, because I think in every company it's normal at some point someone is going to ask you, what are you doing? and when you're on something that big, it might be a bit complex to communicate on that. Also, you have to teach it to people while you're working on it, and that is also a big challenge, because you have people using basically what you're doing to create new things that will come just after yours or at the same time, but they need to learn to use the thing that you haven't yet finished to design, and so that is also a big challenge. So maybe on these points, do you have like personal anecdotes maybe about that, or what does it inspire you?
And I want to say that, to come back to what you said like at the beginning, where people think about developing as like being on a computer and writing code.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, that's what you say. At some point, it's no longer true. We need to communicate, to teach, to explain, to ask for feedback. And I can tell for my team, we had a lot of challenges in the last previous years. And I think the problem is that since we work at a framework layer, everyone is impacted by our code. And when we do some change, it kind of comes as we are imposing our change to the rest of Odoo. And if you just write code and then ask everyone to convert their code to your code base, it will not be so friendly. And you had a lot of hostility at some point on Odoo internally. And I think one of the main solution to that problem was to basically talk to each other. So we have some official channels where we can ask for feedback, and I try to explain to other team what I was trying to do, and to ask if what their feelings about that were. And usually the tone was much more friendlier, much more productive. So there is like that communication, diplomacy skills that you need, and everyone needs to understand that we are not working on just our small code base. We are working in a larger ecosystem, and we need to work with each other.
Especially when you are creating new things. When because the more new the model is, and the bigger the people will have some friction, because it's a new system, and so when your communication is really key.
When you're changing something, actually fundamentally changing something, because everybody is used to the old system, and so everybody is thinking in terms of the old system.
Yes.
And so you're the one responsible to change it and say, okay, we don't do that anymore, now it's totally different. But then you need to convince people that, or at least explain them why it's better, and at least that it's not worse than before.
And maybe for them, for their use case, it's not even better. Maybe we changed something to improve the life of 80% of our developers, and in some rare case, maybe it's worse. I don't know. It could happen. And for their use case, it's more difficult to accept that we change something.
Indeed. And I think it's a perfect time to do a little break now, actually. So we'll be back in like 5 minutes. And I've seen we had a question in the chat, and I think it will be interesting to answer it in the second part of this discussion. So see you in a few minutes. Welcome back. So we were left in the previous. We left you in the previous part with. I told you an interesting question in the chat. I'm gonna add it to the screen now. If I manage to do that, does it work? It works crazy. So the idea here, someone is asking us, what would you improve in your process to drive developers' creativity? So maybe starting, because the process covers a lot of things, right? So there's a lot of aspects to it. I talked a little bit about the management earlier. Maybe we can start with that. So what kind of management structure of way of interacting with the developers would favor more creativity for people?
I think one of the big points that you have may be the way you think about organizing your work. If you work on task-based principles, like you have a big pipe of tasks and all your developers are working on one task, they pick a task, they make it, and they build it, they ship it, and then they pick the next one. Maybe it depends on the task, but maybe it's not so much focused on solving a problem. It's more focused, if you do that, more focused on making a feature,
on
which
producing,
is maybe it's creative in itself. But I was thinking about the kind of creativity that you want when you want to solve, to understand your problem. You don't even know the problem that you have, and that's quite big. If you can understand that you're working in the bad direction, so you need some way to organize to think about your work as not only in terms of task, but in terms of in a more
flows.
You need to think about it. Take some time. Maybe it's what you need. Take some step back, a few hours every week. I think it's well known that Google had some kind of program where developers could work on any kind of project for a few hours, maybe a day, a week. And some of these projects, they became a Google project as well. So maybe having a little bit of time to reflect on your work is important.
I think you're really putting the finger on it, because it's really, I think it's a matter of having the possibility to just take two steps back. The S at the right place is better, and just be able to think, okay, we did that, we implemented that, but isn't there something else to do? And I think it often starts with a question like that. You're like, something feels a bit off. You're not exactly sure what or where, but there might be something to do there, and then you go look into it in more details, and then you start doing something.
Sometimes when you have new people onboarding in your team, it's a very interesting time where they ask questions, and they may ask, why do we work like this? And then maybe if you think about that, you may realize that it's not the best way to do it. Maybe some part of our workflow could be changed, could be automatized. I don't know. So I think having new ideas, fresh ideas is important, and having a new look on what you're doing is important.
I wanted to jump in real quick because I think the question was how do you improve your process to make the developers more creative? And I think one of the important parts that's kind of implicit in this discussion right now, because we've always had that, is that you should put your developers at the center of your process, and they should be in control of it. And at Odoo, teams have the freedom to organize their work how they perceive it to be best. And I think this is probably one of the biggest driving factors behind what allows us to be really creative, is that each team and each developer is faced with challenges that are unique to them and on their workflow. And so it's very important that they can choose their own process. And so at Odoo, we have this kind of canvas that most teams use as their basis, but then depending on the project or on the timing or whatever, they're free to adjust the process. And so there's also creativity in adjusting the process itself, but once you give the tools to your workers to do the good work, and then you let them do it, that's when they can really express themselves and also do their best work. So it's not just about being creative for the sake of it, but it's also how you get developers that are happy and productive and achieving their targets.
It's actually, you need to have a structure that favor personal investment, I think, because the way I usually say to family, or when I try explaining something to them about what I'm doing at work, it's really Odoo, for myself, it does not feel like the thing I do for a living. It feels like a personal project. I mean, the report in accounting, and I know it seems a very boring subject, but the report in accounting, I know the code of these things by heart, and it's really I'm super happy with it, and I'm really, you know, it's like like being a painter. You have your painting, and you're just adding a bit of color there, and you're like, it looks nice, and it's really the same kind of feeling actually.
Yeah, and I think one of the main driver of creativity is emotions and understanding what stimulates our emotions. And we are all different developers, so some developers will react differently to different things. And if we have a way to look at what we are doing, it either improve our creativity or it can destroy it, depending on how we look about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really important to understand how our emotions are working. Sometimes we work by pleasure. We want to create something because we know, I never did this and I really want to know what's going to happen. I'm driven by pleasure. And there's also other emotions like frustration. It's like you see like something is off all the time, it's ugly or whatever, and you are frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes just to cultivate this frustration, I used to do this a lot when I started developing. I was looking everywhere, everything was messy, and I cultivated all this frustration. And what happened is just subconsciously, there were like some kind of wants to resolve it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to resolve it. And then something started to grow in my head, but I'm just cultivating the frustration, and at some point I have solution emerging. And so there is different emotion. I mentioned here like pleasure and frustration. I don't know if you have other kind of emotion in mind, but I think understanding our emotion is pretty important.
Yeah, I agree. I think also when you're frustrated about something like that, and you know it stays in your head, so not to a toxic level, but just you know, so you have to manage that as well, because if you start being too frustrated and become negative and be like, oh, it's never as I want it to be, it's always shitty, then you will put yourself in a mindset where you won't do anything actually, because you feel like disconnected from what's going on with the software. But I think up to a certain level, it's really interesting because, you know, even if you don't find a solution yourself to the thing that you're thinking about, and you've been keeping that in your head for months, years, and every once in a while you're like, oh, come on, this should be better. It's too bad we have to do that like that. But maybe at some point someone is going to come with a question, just a question. You know, some newbie coming with a question, naive question about something, and you're like, damn, but he's right. Or just some new need will arise for something else, and you will be like, actually, maybe we could mix both problems and solve them in one way and have something super clean then. So that's also a way of having inspiration.
Yeah, and then maybe you need to have some kind of authority to solve the problem, or to take a step to solve the problem. So if you identify the problem, that's what you're saying, if you're frustrated by something or by the code base, then you know you should know that you can solve it. And that's I think that's what works well at Odoo. In most Odoo teams, we know, or we should know, that we can just take a few hours to try a proof of concept, to try to implement a solution, or maybe to have some idea. Then you can try to sell that idea, sell that solution to other people. And if we manage to convince the right people, we can then hopefully get it done.
Yeah.
We have a bunch of questions in the chat, and I think I'm going to pick this one about someone wanting to specialize in Odoo development and asking us what skills and knowledge we would recommend to focus on, because we didn't say it really, but we were like touching the subject, so I think it's the right time for that, because from what you say, there is a lot of autonomy involved, and
that's what Sam said. He said that each team can organize themselves in the way that they think is the most productive to solve their problems.
And I think this autonomy also, as Judith was saying, it intervenes at an individual level where people have the autonomy to make the decision. I'm going to explore this idea and try to convince people. Like, I'm going to do a proof of concept, and then we're going to see does this work or does this not work? But to get into the question itself a little more, like obviously there's a lot of technical skills that you have to learn, but that's kind of not the focus here. So in terms of like creative skills and human skills, I would say it's being comfortable with the unknown and also not being afraid to dig into things. And this is also one of the things that allows me to be very creative inside of the Odoo code base is I love to go dig around and see how stuff works. So this is something that really helps with coming up with new ideas and ways to solve the problems and do it well, just reading a lot of the code because as I was saying at the very beginning, having the right building blocks and the tools in your tool belt is like one of the few things that is really required before you can start being creative. You can't paint on a canvas if you don't have a paintbrush and some paint, right? So you have to acquire the tools, and then once you have all of the tools, the more tools you have in your toolkit, the more things you can achieve.
And indeed, there are also different ways of specializing yourself. For example, personally, I like to have one subject for which I know not everything, but that I know really, 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 really well. That's really that. People often ask me, and aren't you bored after spending so much time? So it's been 7 years now in accounting. I'm still not, but I like this idea of getting more specialized into what accounting is doing. And then you have multiple ways of doing that. There are other profiles that will prefer to just change scope every X years because this gives them a broader look at what Odoo is doing. And I think you need both profiles actually.
I want to comment on the question just a little bit. I think that you need some technical skills, obviously, but I'm not looking for people with a deep JavaScript experience when they come into my team. It's nice to have, but I think what matters more is that they're motivated, they're interested in the project, and they want to make a difference.
Yeah.
And they have an open mind, right? Because sometimes you have people who come into a project and they already have their idea of how they want to do things, and obviously we want to be to listen to them and evaluate the ideas. But some people just want to don't want to change course even after you've talk to them. So I think being very open-minded is also a really huge help and the requirement to be effective in a team and while working on Odoo projects.
Sure, because it's not because you have a lot of ideas that they're good, actually.
But maybe they're good, but not in every context. I don't have a magic solution for every problem for now. I'm still looking for it, but I didn't find it yet.
The philosopher's stone.
maybe some days, who knows. But for example, in the JavaScript framework world, many frameworks now are moving toward function components instead of class components. It's a simple example, and you really have like two kind of languages. You have those functional languages and those oriented object language. Okay, and then there is maybe functional programming is very nice. It's very useful, and I love it. But when we were working in the Odoo code base, we decided on using classes, for example, and for some good reasons.
We have another question touching to the way Odoo developers work and handle problems, and I think it's fairly interesting as well. So how do we keep our hair? We don't all manage.
I don't.
Nicolas, what's your opinion?
You're asking the wrong cast.
But more seriously, so how do you basically the idea is how do you handle the things that the customers keep on asking, and a lot of customers means a lot of different people asking very different things, a lot of different workflows, a lot of things that they see as the most important thing, while it's actually just some habit they took on some other software. So it is indeed a big challenge, and maybe sometimes it also requires a lot of creativity actually to find a way to have something that they will like accept. And then
sometimes you also have to find creative ways to say no.
Of course.
Like obviously clients, they have their ideas in mind, and in the same way that someone who's new to a team has their own ideas in mind, and sometimes their ideas won't work. Sometimes you have to explain to the client that it won't work. Sometimes they have good ideas and you can work with them. And so I think you just have to get comfortable with it. It's one of the realities of the job, the same way that sometimes if Fabien thinks something is really great for the product, even if we don't agree, we have to do it, and that's fine. And obviously, the state of Odoo at the moment suggests that it's probably not a bad thing. So,
Indeed.
yeah, you have to learn to live with it and work with it. And if you don't like it, then maybe just working directly with clients is not for you. And in those cases, this is also why the Odoo is structured in a way that most R&D developers are not in direct relations with customers, and we just have product owners who are responsible for taking all this feedback, integrating it, and filtering it to align with the direction of the software. And so that's kind of a privilege of our position as R&D developers, because obviously there's also a department that does customizations for clients, and in those cases, well, the customer is the one that decides what needs to be done. So maybe if you don't like interacting with customers all that much, maybe you can find a software position that's not as closely in relation with customers as the one that you're currently doing.
Because this indeed involves a lot of diplomacy, and sometimes you don't want to do that. Indeed, I know there are people in R&D that can't stand that, and they are very happy not having to do that because they cannot be just diplomat with people, and they will just say no, it's useless. And you shouldn't be in front of a customer if you do that.
Yeah, like being a developer is a surprisingly human-centric job for something that's widely perceived as just being some guy typing letters on their keyboard.
Sure. Maybe going back on the bigger subject. So we talked about the working with customers, product owners, all that. A big question that a lot of people might have also, I had a discussion with someone someday, not so long ago actually, about that. I was telling her I was working on some accounting app for an ERP software, and I could see that her idea was really like, oh, it must be super boring. Is it so boring? Is it something that can kill creativity in the end? That at the end of the day, you're not especially excited about the problem you're wanting to solve, the use of the final software you're doing, or is it something? And you can feel my answer in my question, but or is it something that I'm sorry, I have a very strong opinion. I work in accounting, 7 years, man. If I thought it was boring, I wouldn't be there. But so, or is it something that, is there something else actually that makes you stay in this kind of context?
I'm kind of a big nerd, and so I just love writing software, and regardless of the problem that I'm solving, I'm having fun because I'm writing software. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask, but I think that the notion that ERP is boring is kind of only from people from the outside world who find it boring, like the business is boring. But if you're interested in business, obviously, first of all, it's not boring for you. But even if you're not interested in the business itself, as a developer, like the problems that you're solving are still interesting, I think.
I think we have a huge range of interesting problems. We can work at so many kind of technical issues. You can work on the ORM, on SQL queries, on the business part, or maybe on the web browser, or you can write. I had to write a compiler and a parser for the compiling templates into JavaScript framework.
Mm-hmm.
You have like a huge range of problems that you need to solve in an ERP.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and also the creativity has some phases. Sometimes we are just bored because we are just human. So, and I think when I started to develop, and I see the pattern in other people beginning their career in development, where at some point they just got bored, and then there's a question: should I quit now? So I had this a few times, but then I just I'm bored for like 3 weeks, but then it start again. And so sometimes it's just part of life, just being
spark.
Yeah, the creativity spark. So and so just working with the flow. Sometimes we know we are in a creative flow, and then we just do creative things. And when it's not there, we can just do repetitive tasks. And also this is, as I said, like managing the emotions. And how do we frame what we are doing in our heads it's changing how we perceive the work that we do. So there's also this part of being creative. Okay, how can I see the work I'm doing as being meaningful? And there's many ways actually. So sometimes if we are stuck in feeling, okay, I'm bored, but then we step back and we think, why am I bored? And what can be meaningful? And sometimes I'm just like just conversation with the team and trying to reset our vision, and then poof, creativity comes.
I think it's important indeed to put yourself in a mindset and in a level of personal stress and tension that will allow new ideas to spark. So indeed, sometimes we were talking about the deadlines earlier. Sometimes you're in a hurry. You need to do the thing, and of course there is some tension for that. But I think sometimes it's important to just be able to be more calm about the thing, and sometimes you have to do boring tasks as well. You need to change to change some labels somewhere, or just to change a flow a little bit. But basic things that will take sometimes a bit of time, but that you essentially need to do because it's just part of the job. And I think it's good to have those actually, because it sets you in a mind state where spontaneously someday something will happen that will make you say, whoa, but actually we should do something there, and it's important, and not putting too much pressure on yourself to absolutely have ideas. I need to have ideas all the time. I think it's a good thing, because if you do that, my opinion is that you essentially will end up doing a burnout or something, but actually not creating for that long. Actually.
But even then, I think what you're saying is that creativity is not an end in itself. There is a method to the madness. We're not creative. We're not doing creative work just to do creative work, even if it's a nice perk. At the end, we have some job to do, something to do, and doing it is useful when you need to solve a problem that you have. So you don't need to invent problems then solve them.
Sure. Because also, if you put pressure on yourself to absolutely have ideas all the time, that's what you will end up doing, because you will imagine things that you could want to solve, because you need to solve things. So let's find something, and essentially you will work for nothing, I think, and probably make the code base more complex also if you do these kind of things.
That's a big issue with many people on the developer side. They want to imagine like a nice, interesting and powerful system, and sometimes it makes sense, and sometimes just a simple if statement is fine. And okay, it's not sexy, it's not fun,
or it might be more sexy actually.
But in a way, it's easier. So you need to take that into account.
Yeah, bouncing back on that, I think it's important to highlight the importance of boring work as a driver of creativity, because sometimes you need some downtime.
That's true.
Like as Olivier was saying, sometimes you just need to change a bunch of labels in a lot of places in the code, and you can't do it automatically with search and replace for whatever reason. And this is the time where your mind gets sometimes to settle down, and the ideas can just distill slowly through all of the steps, and then at some point you get the idea, the illumination. You get something that was hiding in the background, maybe some frustration that you encountered previously while working and you didn't know how to solve. Then just having some downtime, some space to let ideas simmer and grow, I think it's also really important. Yeah.
I'm going to make a reference that nobody's going to get. Kudos if you do, but you won't.
I won't.
You need a serene state of mind. That being said, we are reaching the end of the episode here. We have one last question in the chat that I think we can use it for our conclusion. I'm just going to display it. Book. So, as Odoo developers, what is the app you're the most excited with, creatively speaking? Haha.
For me, it's easy, but it's not really an app. It's the old framework.
Yeah, I could force you to give an app name. Huh?
If you want. I can give an application that I quite like. It's the spreadsheet application. I think it's a really beautiful code base.
Nice. That's a good reason. So it's the kind of things you look at the code that often you're like, whoa, it's impressive.
Yeah, it's impressive. It solves a lot of problems in a nice ways. It's powerful. It's I love it.
So it's inspiring.
Yeah, it is.
if I had to give the name of an app, I'd probably say website. It's the app on which I worked when I started at Odoo, and I think it's both creative as a developer, but also you're empowering the customers to do their own creative things, right? They can build their own website and make it look great. They can write their own content, and so we're building tools for other people to be creative, and I think that's kind of one of the most creative things that you can do inside of Odoo.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I would say it's the web client. The web client is very fast, but it's kind of an app in some ways. But okay, a proper app would be a knowledge. Knowledge is really nice because it has a lot of future possibilities where it can grow very big. So yeah, I'm fond of it.
Okay, I could say accounting, which would be a bit.
You can?
It would be the right thing.
I'm gonna give a very provocative answer, because to me the most exciting, creatively speaking, is the one that needs the most changes, and I'm definitely going to pick consolidation for this, definitely. So you can expect things for the next version in this one. And so that being said, it's time to say goodbye. So thank you very much for taking part to the discussion. I think it was super interesting. I think we went through a crazy lot of different subjects, and hopefully we gave people really the spark, actually. Hopefully we gave a lot of interesting insights, and if you are yourself, maybe considering joining Odoo or wanting to have advices on how to manage your own work as a software developer, I think it could have given you a bunch of keys to do that, and to really grow your creativity. So that is it's the end of the year, so I have to say Merry Christmas, I have to say Happy New Year. The next episode of Odoo Unplugged will be next month, so in January, so next year I can say it. And this episode will also be rebroadcasted on YouTube, and as a 2-part episode in our podcast Planet Odoo, so you can find it there again in the future as well if you want to re-listen to everything we said. Thank you for viewing this episode, and see you soon. Cheers.